The first thing she felt was the cold of the marble floor seeping through the thin soles of her slippers, a chill that climbed her spine as the herald's voice boomed through the vaulted throne room. His Royal Majesty, King Valerius, first of his name, Alpha Sovereign of the Lycanthrian Dominion. Every knee in the hall hit the floor in an echoing, synchronized thud. Elara's head remained bowed, her gaze fixed on the intricate veins of gray stone between her hands. But her peripheral vision caught the ripple of movement, the shadow that fell long and deep across the dais. She felt him before she saw him, a pressure in the air, a silent predatory weight that stilled the very breath in her lungs. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the last queen had died, and in all that time, the story said, the Alpha King had not so much as glanced at a woman. He ruled with a cold, untouchable fury, a beast of grief and war who had walled himself off from the world. She heard the heavy sweep of his cloak, the soft tread of his boots on the steps. The silence in the hall was absolute, a living thing strung taut with fear and awe. Elara, a low-ranking scribe from the archives, tucked into the shadows of a pillar, had no business feeling the intensity of that silence like a physical touch, but she did. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The herald began the long list of petitions, a border dispute, a trade levy. The murmuring voices were a distant buzz. Elara risked a glance upward, just a sliver of a look from beneath her lashes. He sat upon the obsidian throne, carved from the heart of a mountain. Not lounging, but rigid, as if the very act of sitting was a burden. He wore black, the fabric absorbing the torchlight, and a simple silver circlet rested on his brow. His face was all harsh lines and unforgiving angles, a face carved from the same stone as his throne. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the crowd with detached, chilling efficiency. They were eyes that had seen entire kingdoms burn. And yet, within them, there was a hollowed-out emptiness, a vast and frozen sea. Then, as the Minister of Grain droned on, a commotion erupted at the far doors. A scuffle, a panicked cry. A young page, no more than 12, had tripped while carrying a heavy urn of wine. The clay shattered against the marble, a crimson wave erupting across the flawless floor, splattering the hem of a nobleman's robe. "Fool!" the nobleman hissed, backhanding the boy so hard he sprawled into the spreading wine. Elara moved without thought. It was a reflex honed from a childhood of stepping between her younger siblings and their father's temper. She slipped from her pillar, her own fear forgotten, and crossed the few steps to the boy. She knelt in the wine, ignoring the sticky warmth soaking through her skirts, and gathered the sobbing child against her, turning her back to shield him from further blows. She murmured something low and soothing, wiping his tears with the clean corner of her sleeve. It was a small act of defiance in a court that prized cold power above compassion. The hall had gone utterly silent again, but this silence was different. It was shocked, waiting. Elara felt the weight of 1,000 stares. Then she felt his. It was like being speared by lightning. A current, hot and devastating, shot through her veins. Her head snapped up, her eyes drawn across the vast space, as if by a physical wire directly to the throne. King Valerius was no longer looking at the scene of the accident. He was looking at her. And the frozen sea in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raging, tempestuous fire. His nostrils flared. His knuckles were white where they gripped the arms of the throne. The air in the room seemed to thicken, to crackle with a latent, primal energy that made the hairs on every courtier's neck stand on end. The alpha power, usually a tightly leashed force, rippled through the hall in a suffocating wave. He leaned forward just an inch, but the movement held the gravity of a landslide. His voice, when it came, was not a roar, but a low, graveled command that vibrated in the bones of everyone present. It was a voice that had not spoken with such raw, undiluted intensity in years. "Bring that girl to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from." If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The command hung in the air, a guillotine blade paused mid-fall. Elara's blood turned to ice water. The comforting words she'd been whispering to the page died on her lips. "Bring that girl to me." There was no ambiguity. The king's storm cloud gaze was locked on her, and hers alone. Two royal guards in silver-edged armor detached themselves from the shadows of the dais. Their movements were swift, silent, and utterly devoid of emotion. The sea of courtiers parted before them like wheat before a scythe, some faces alight with morbid curiosity, others pale with fear. No one looked at her with pity. She was already a ghost in their eyes, a piece of furniture that had suddenly, catastrophically, drawn the attention of a wrathful god. Elara gently disentangled herself from the trembling page, giving his shoulder one last squeeze. She stood, her legs trembling so violently she was sure they would buckle. The wine soaked the front of her simple gray dress, a stark, embarrassing stain. She was a splash of messy color in a hall of calculated opulence. As the guards approached, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords, she forced her spine straight. Dignified under pressure, some distant, surviving part of her mind whispered, "You can be afraid, but do not let them see you crumble." The walk to the foot of the dais was the longest of her life. The click of the guards' boots on either side of her was a metronome counting down to an unknown fate. She could feel the king's eyes on her with every step, a physical heat that warred with the cold dread in her stomach. What had she done? Offered comfort to a child. In this court was kindness a capital offense. She stopped at the prescribed distance, 10 feet from the first step. Protocol dictated she kneel. Her body refused. She stood, head bowed but back straight, staring at the intricate carvings of wolves and battles on the steps. "Look at me." The order was quieter now, but no less potent. It vibrated through her, a subsonic command that her very cells seemed to obey. She lifted her head. Up close, he was more terrifying and more devastatingly beautiful than any statue or portrait could convey. The harsh lines of his face spoke of sleepless nights and unforgiving years. A thin, pale scar cut through his left eyebrow. His lips were a firm, unsmiling line, but his eyes, they were no longer just burning. They were searching, roaming over her face with a frantic, almost desperate intensity, as if he were trying to solve a riddle written in a forgotten language. He inhaled deeply, his broad chest expanding under the dark fabric of his tunic. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. The entire court was holding its breath. Your name. It wasn't a question. It was a demand pulled from the depths of him. "Elara," she said, and was surprised when her voice didn't shake. It came out soft, but clear in the silent hall. "Elara of the Western Archives, Your Majesty. Elara." He repeated her name, and the way it rolled off his tongue, low and deliberate, made something deep within her clench. It sounded like an invocation, a secret. He leaned back in his throne, though his posture remained rigid. The initial shock in his gaze was being forcibly banked, replaced by a scrutinizing sharpness. "You serve in the archives?" "Yes, Your Majesty." As a scribe and cataloger, she kept her answers short, her eyes lowered after that first, searing contact. To look at him felt like staring into the sun, blinding and dangerous. "You stepped forward when others stepped back." He stated it as a fact. "You stained your garments for a page boy you do not know. Explain." This was the trap. Would he see it as an insult, a disruption, a weakness? She chose the truth, the only armor she had. "There was no thought to explain, sire. He was hurt and afraid." "It was instinct, instinct," he echoed, and the words seemed to hold a world of meaning for him. That intense, searching look returned. He was silent for another long moment, and the pressure in the room escalated. She could hear the rustle of silk as someone shifted nervously in the crowd. Finally, he spoke, his voice dropping so low that perhaps only the guards and she could hear its full, gritty texture. "The petitions are concluded for the day." Clear the hall. A collective, stunned inhale swept through the courtiers. The royal herald, looking flustered, stammered, "But Your Majesty." The delegation from the Sun Kingdom. Clear the hall. The alpha power laced those 3 words, not as a shout, but as a deep, resonant pulse of authority that made the very torches flicker. It was a sound that brooked no argument, a sound that spoke of ancient, predatory dominance. Chaos ensued, albeit a silent, hurried one. Bows and curtsies were performed in a frantic rush, the crowd streaming toward the exits with a rustle of fine fabrics and hushed, terrified whispers. Elara stood frozen, an island in the suddenly emptying vastness of the throne room. The two guards remained at her sides. The king did not move from his throne. As the last courtier disappeared and the enormous oak doors thudded shut, the silence became a living, breathing entity. It was just the king, the guards, and her in the cavernous space, lit by the dying afternoon light filtering through high stained glass windows. King Valerius rose. He was taller than she had imagined, his frame powerful even without the bulk of ceremonial armor. He descended the dais steps slowly, each footfall a deliberate tap on the stone. He stopped a mere arm's length from her. She could smell him now, not perfume, but clean linen, cold night air, and something deeper, wilder, like pine and untouched snow. And beneath it, a faint, tantalizing hint of amber and smoke. He did not touch her, but his proximity was an assault on her senses. Her body hummed with a strange, alien awareness. Every nerve ending felt alive, raw. "Why do you smell of jasmine in old paper?" he asked, his voice a rough murmur. It was such an unexpected, intimate question that it knocked the last of her breath from her. The archives, sire. The lower vaults where I work are lined with drying jasmine to keep the moths away. The paper is my work. He took half a step closer. She had to tilt her head back to maintain her lowered gaze, now fixed on the silver clasp of his cloak. His heat radiated toward her. "Look at me, Elara." She couldn't refuse. Her eyes lifted, trapped by his. The storm there had calmed to a turbulent, gray intensity. He was studying her with a fascination that bordered on pain. "For 3 years," he said, the words sounding torn from him, "I have felt nothing. A numbness so complete I believed my soul had left my body. The world has been gray ash on my tongue." He lifted a hand, not to touch her, but to gesture at the space between them. "Then you kneel and spilled wine, and the world screams back into color. Sound returns. I can feel the air move. I can smell the jasmine on your skin from across a room that has otherwise been scentless to me for 1,000 days." Her heart was pounding so fiercely, she was certain he could see it beating against the stained fabric of her dress. This was not about punishment. This was something far more terrifying, more impossible. "I don't understand," she whispered, the confession escaping her. "Neither do I," he admitted, and the raw confusion in his voice. The vulnerability from a man made of legend and marble was more disarming than any threat. But this pull. He finally closed the last of the distance, not touching her, but leaning in so his words were a warm breath near her ear. "It is a physical ache, an undeniable truth. And it is centered on you." He straightened, and the mask of the unapproachable king slammed back into place, though it was now fractured, with that desperate fire still burning in the cracks. "You will be moved to the royal wing. Tonight, you are relieved of your duties in the archives." Panic, sharp and sudden, lanced through her awe. "Your Majesty, my work, my family." "Your family will be compensated. Your work is now here." His tone left no room for debate. He turned to the captain of the guard who had remained, stone-faced, by the throne. "Take her to the sunbeam chambers. Post a guard. She is not to be disturbed by anyone." His eyes flicked back to her, and the command softened, just a fraction. "You will have everything you need. We will speak tomorrow." It was a dismissal. The guard captain approached, giving a curt nod. "This way, my lady." The title, so foreign, so wrong, jolted her. Elara cast one last, bewildered look at the Alpha King. He had turned away, his broad shoulders tense, staring up at the crest carved behind his throne, a lone wolf howling at a shattered moon. The isolation in his stance was absolute, a monument to 3 years of solitude he had just, for reasons unknown, shattered because of her. As she was led away, not toward the servants' quarters, but into the gilded labyrinth of the royal residence, the reality settled upon her like a heavy cloak. She was a scribe who smelled of jasmine and old paper. He was a king who hadn't touched a woman in 3 years. And now she belonged to him. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The sunbeam chambers were a gilded cage. Elara stood in the center of the main sitting room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as the silent serving women finished their tasks. They had drawn a bath in an adjoining room scented with roses, not jasmine, and laid out a collection of gowns on the vast bed. The dresses were beautiful, all silk and velvet in shades of twilight blue, emerald, and deep crimson. They were not the rough-spun gray of a scribe. They were the colors of a court lady, perhaps even a favored one. The women did not speak to her. Their eyes, when they flicked in her direction, held a mixture of awe and fear. The king's command in the throne room had spread through the palace like wildfire. The rumor was already taking shape. The untouchable king had finally seen someone, and it was a nobody from the archives with wine on her dress. When they finally left, bowing silently, the heavy door clicked shut. Elara heard the distinct sound of a bolt sliding home on the outside. Not a guard posted for her safety then. A guard posted to keep her in. The panic that had been a cold knot in her stomach began to unravel into full-blown terror. She stumbled to a plush divan and sank onto it, her breath coming in short gasps. Think, Elara, breathe. She was a cataloger. She organized chaos. She needed to catalog this. Fact. King Valerius, in front of his entire court, had ordered her brought to him. Fact. He had spoken of a pull, of senses returning after years of numbness. Fact. She was now locked in luxurious rooms in the royal wing. Conclusion. She was trapped in a mystery with a man more dangerous than any beast in the old tales. A man who looked at her as if she were a ghost, a miracle and a torment all at once. The hours crawled by. A dinner tray was brought in by a stern-faced guard. The food, exquisite roasted pheasant, honey-glazed vegetables, warm bread. It tasted like ash in her mouth. Night fell, draping the chambers in deep blue shadow. She lit a few candles from the single one left with her meal, their small flames doing little to push back the enormity of the space, or her fear. She did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon track its path across the sky, listening to the sounds of the palace settling. In the deep quiet of the night, she heard the faint, distant sound of a howl. It was not the sound of an ordinary wolf. It was deeper, mournful, filled with a loneliness so profound it echoed in the hollow of her own chest. The Alpha King, mourning a loss no one understood, or perhaps howling at a newfound torment. She must have dozed off near dawn, her head against the cold window pane, for she was jolted awake by the sound of the bolt being drawn back. The door opened, and not a servant, but the same guard captain from the throne room entered. He gave a short bow. His Majesty requests your presence in the West Pavilion garden. In what hour? His eyes swept over her, still in yesterday's stained dress. Appropriate attire will be provided. An hour later, feeling like a stranger in her own skin, Elara walked beside the captain through a secluded corridor. The dress they had chosen for her was a simple, high-neck gown of soft silver gray, the color of moonlight on mist. It was elegant, but unadorned, and it felt less like a costume than the vibrant silks from the night before. Her hair had been brushed and left loose, cascading down her back another divergence from her usual practical braid. The West Pavilion was a private enclave, walled off from the main gardens. As the captain ushered her through an arched gate and then retreated, closing it behind him, Elara stopped short. It was a wild place. Unlike the meticulously ordered royal gardens, this was a tangle of night-blooming flowers, their petals closing against the morning sun, of climbing vines and ancient gnarled trees. A small, clear stream cut through the center, its burble the only sound. And there, standing by the water's edge, his back to her, was King Valerius. He wore no crown today, no official robes. Just a dark gray tunic and trousers, his black hair slightly tousled by the breeze. He seemed less a king and more a man, though the power still clung to him, a latent energy in the set of his shoulders. He turned. The morning light caught the planes of his face, softening the harshness she'd seen in the throne room. The storm in his eyes was present, but quieter, a rolling fog rather than a tempest. Elara. He said her name like a test, as if seeing if the effect was the same. A flicker in his gaze confirmed it was. She dipped into a curtsy, her movements stiff. "Your Majesty, walk with me," he said, not a command but an invitation that held the weight of one. She fell into step beside him, leaving a careful 3 feet of space between them. The tension was a living wire, stretching taut. Every step made it vibrate. "You did not sleep," he observed, his voice low. "Did you?" The retort left her lips before she could cage it. She froze, horrified at her own impudence. A strange, almost imperceptible sound escaped him. It took her a moment to realize it was a dry husk of a laugh. "No, I did not." He glanced at her. "The howling kept you awake." "It was." Very lonely. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The directness of her words seemed to strike him. "Lonely," he repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that is the word for it." He studied her face, his eyes tracing the lines of fatigue under hers. "I have brought you into that loneliness, unfairly, and I cannot explain why. You said you felt a pull," she ventured, her heart hammering. "A pull?" He looked away toward the rushing stream. "It is an insufficient word. It is as if a part of me that has been dormant, dead, has been violently resurrected. When I saw you, it was not with my eyes first. It was with something else. A sense I had forgotten I possessed." He turned his gaze back to her, intense and bewildered. "You are Lycan, Elara of the Archives?" The question was routine, but the answer felt monumental. "My mother was sire, my father was human. I am what they call a halfling." She said it without shame, but with the accustomed defensiveness of one who had always been slightly less, slightly other in a world of pure-blooded power. Halflings had weaker connections to their wolves, often manifesting no shift at all. They were background characters in the Lycan drama. King Valerius went utterly still. "A halfling?" He breathed the word out, not with disdain, but with dawning, world-shattering comprehension. "That is why I didn't. That is why it took so long." He took a step toward her, closing the distance she had maintained. "Yusen is muted, faded beneath the jasmine in the paper. It's been hidden." "What has been hidden?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The air between them crackled. She could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat. "Mine." The word was a possessive growl, low and guttural, that seemed to come from the earth itself. It wasn't a cruel claim, but a primal, odd realization. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. His fingers hovered near her cheek, not touching. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "For 3 years since my Luna died, the bond was severed. It left a void, a silence. My wolf went dormant. I believed it was a permanent death of that part of my soul." His eyes were locked on hers, blazing with a truth that terrified her. It wasn't dead. It was waiting for the other half of itself to come close enough to sense. His hand trembled slightly. "You are not just a halfling. Elara, you are an unbonded Luna, my unbonded Luna, and my wolf has just woken up and recognized its mate." The world tilted. The stream's babble faded into a roar in her ears. Mate? Luna, the words were myths, titles from epic tales, not realities for a scribe from the archives. The Lycan King's bond with his Luna was a sacred, powerful thing, a merging of power and soul that stabilized the throne and the kingdom itself. When his Luna had died, it had nearly destroyed him, and had left the kingdom teetering for years. "No," she breathed, stumbling back a step. "That's impossible. I have no power. I can barely sense my own wolf. It's a whisper, a shadow, because it has been waiting for the other half of its heart to call it forth." The desperation was back in his voice. He raked a hand through his hair. "Do you think I want this? To find my mate in a woman who looks at me with fear in her eyes? To append your life for a destiny you never asked for? The pull is not a gentle thing, Elara. It is a command. It is an agony. To be so near you and not." He broke off, his jaw clenching. The raw need in his expression was unmistakable, a physical pain. The revelation crashed over her in waves. The king's 3-year isolation, his numbness, His sudden, intense focus on her. It wasn't whimsy or cruelty. It was biology, destiny, politics of the most deadly kind. The court, she said, her mind reeling to the practical, to the danger. If they suspect, if they think a halfling, an unbonded, untested nobody is the king's fated Luna, they will see you as a weakness to be exploited, or a threat to be eliminated, he finished grimly. My counsel, the noble houses. They have spent 3 years trying to push their daughters, their sisters, onto the throne beside me. They will not welcome you. The personal terror was suddenly eclipsed by a larger, more frightening reality. She was in a political game where the stakes were her life and the stability of a kingdom. And she knew nothing of the rules. What do you want from me? Her voice was small in the vast, wild garden. He looked at her then, and the mask of the king was completely gone. In its place was just Valerius, a man burdened by a crown and a fate he couldn't control. I want to understand. I want to know if this connection can be something more than a shock to my system. I need to know if the bond can form. His voice dropped. And I need to keep you safe while we find out. That starts with you staying close, where I can protect you. As your prisoner, she stated, the bitterness leaking through. As my guest, he countered, though his eyes acknowledged the lie of the locked door. Until we can determine the truth and the threat. You have a choice, Elara. You can walk back through that gate right now. I will order the captain to take you to the archives, and I will spend every remaining day of my life fighting the instinct to follow you. Or you can stay, learn what this is, and help me navigate a court that will soon want to devour you whole. It was no choice at all. Leaving meant returning to her old life, but with a target on her back the moment his interest became known. Staying meant walking into the wolf's den, quite literally. She looked at him, at this powerful, lonely, wounded man who claimed she was the other half of his soul. She felt no cosmic recognition, no surge of power. Just fear, confusion, and a treacherous, unwelcome thread of pity and something else, something she dared not name. That had sparked when his fingers hovered near her skin. I'll stay, she said, the words feeling like a vow. Something like relief flickered in his stormy eyes, followed immediately by a deeper, more protective ferocity. Then we begin today. You will have lessons. History, politics, court etiquette. You will learn to defend yourself, at least in principle. And we will test the connection. How? Before he could answer, a voice called from the gate. Your Majesty? The Solarian ambassador insists on an audience. He says it is urgent. Valerius' face hardened into the familiar, impassive mask of the king. The moment of vulnerability was gone, sealed away. Duty calls, he said, his voice once more cool and distant. Captain Thorne will escort you back. We will continue this tomorrow. He began to turn away, then paused. He looked back at her, and for a fleeting second, the intensity returned. The howling will stop, Elara, now that I've found you. The silence is finally bearable. He left her then, striding toward the gate, leaving her standing by the stream more confused and conflicted than ever. The pull he described was still a mystery to her. But his loneliness, that she understood. And as the captain reappeared to lead her back to her gilded cage, a single dangerous thought took root. What if, in helping him bear his silence, she might finally find her own voice? 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.